Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 162, where we read philosophy and review it live on the internet. Just find a random paper and read. Because of America, we're doing some philosophy of race. Currently, let's see, where are we? Ba-ba-ba. Clicky clicky, no clicky. Okay, now we're loading. Oh, internet, please, no. It's working. Okay, so let's go down to philosophy of race and see what we got. Philosophy of race. Alright. Now, maybe we should do one of these subsections because there's going to be the same stuff on this top of uncategorized list. Oh, we could just go to page 2, I guess, and see what that is. Let's try that. It's simpler. Alright. Alright. That's interesting. This is philosophy of gender and race. Alright, let's see what else we got. Take a look at that one. Comments and top. Shelby. Good. Oh wait, that's true. Just read a paper on Shelby yesterday, I believe. The ethics of ghetto abolitionism. Interesting. Commentary on dark ghettos. Maybe Dark Ghetto is the book. Yeah, it must be the book, so it's a commentary. Make America Great. The NASSP book prize. What is this? A book review? Yeah. Book review, book review, book review, book review. The Christian Church's role in escalating mob justice system in our black townships. An African pastoral view. So theological studies. So that's interesting. McCarthy race review article. Don't want to do reviews. Awakening to Race: Unusual and Social Consciousness in America. Yeah. What an entangled world we weave, emotions of rethinking us and them. Hypatia. I haven't read anything in Hypatia in a while. I think I have read something in Hypatia. Now, let's take a look at what we got. So, of course, anyone out there is free to send me a paper, and I can read that at some point. Nope. Review essay. Ah, that's what it was. No, I don't really like reading review essays because they're very focused. Well, you know, in some sense, all the papers are very focused on something, but it's like if it's only focused on like one book, it's harder. Response to commentators, yeah. By Tommy Shelby. Okay, so yeah, that might be interesting. I wonder if they should read a response paper like from the author response, because then you'd get a different thing. This is a review, a bunch of maybe that's why. Maybe all these reviews are not classified, which is interesting. Should think about how to get papers. Okay, this is download from archive. There we go. So let's just see how long this one says it is. 14 pages. Yeah, we can do that. Let's go for it. Let's take a look. Yeah, 13 pages. Very reasonable. This is a okay, it's an examination of the account. That's fine. So I just don't want to read like reviews like a summary paper on stuff, because it's not. It doesn't have the argument. Sometimes it has the argument, but then I'm reading the reviewer's view of the argument, which is sort of one step removed, and makes it a little bit difficult. I just have to take the reviewer's word for everything, as opposed to analyzing their arguments. Okay, so you can grab the link in the show notes if you'd like. Also, you can always type !paper if you're here late, and the link is not there anymore. And the link will pop up if you type !paper. It'll be in the show notes if you're below the video, if you're watching on the YouTubes or afterwards. Okay, so what entangled web we have: emotions, motivation, and rethinking us and the other by Myisha. As per usual, I apologize for how I pronounce everyone's names. I have no idea how you pronounce your names. And also, if I don't get anything right, this is my first time reading it too. But feel free to chat, feel free to ask questions, and I will try to figure it out. Entangled Empathy is not only a philosophically rich and illuminating way to view ethics, but it is also a practical and accessible text that provides a novel way to respond to and reimagine our relationships with others. In Entangled Empathy, Laurie Gruen demystifies empathy, defends it, and directs us to a particular target: non-human animals. Kitties! On her view, entangled empathy is not only an emotion or cognition, but a type of caring perception. She denies that it is a panacea or easy solution to all of our problems, for she claims that her account of empathy is a process that requires not only recognition and understanding, but also practice and work. Gruen also defends her account of empathy against empathy skeptics like Jesse Prince and Paul Bloom, who paint empathy with a broad stroke by claiming that empathy is not helpful in ethics. Gruen argues that empathy skeptics' real target is unreflective empathy. Entangled empathy escapes their criticisms because entangled empathy is reflective. It directs our attention to the things that need moral response, can help us provide context and understanding about what the right response would be, and it can provide us with a more accurate picture of who we are and what our responsibilities to others might be. Skeptics like Prince and Bloom focus their attention on the empathy we extend to human animals, but Gruen challenges us to focus our attention on non-human animals. We can empathize with a bat by imagining what it's like to be a bat. I'm not sure about this. I'm getting less and less, I may be more and more with Wittgenstein and less with, what was his name? I'm blanking on who wrote it. What it's like to be a bat at the moment. But it's more, I might be going more Wittgensteinian, saying if a lion could speak, we would not understand it. I don't know. We can empathize, though. We do. But I don't know if we empathize by what it's like to be a bat, but we can empathize with other things. If you, like a bat steps on a nail. It could happen. You could empathize with stepping on a nail. But to be in their shoes, to take on their wings. Well, maybe. But we can definitely empathize with other animals. We can also empathize by catching the emotions of dogs, cats, and other animals. I will again post the one of my favorite cat videos on the internet, where you can just it is so obvious what the cat is feeling. I'll post that in the show notes. I've used it before because there's almost no doubt in the mutual understanding and empathy between us and the cat in that video. It's just great. Gruen's account, however, takes us much further than mere feeling and imagination. Entangled Empathy calls us not just to imagine what it's like to be a bat, but to recognize that we are already in relationships with bats and are called upon to be responsible by attending to their needs, vulnerabilities, and hopes. I see Gruen's account of entangled empathy not merely an account of emotion, cognition, and perception, but also an account of care, duty, and moral motivation. If there's any such thing as preaching to the choir, I consider Laurie the preacher and myself a choir member. I'm a vegan, and all vegans have an obligation to obnoxiously announce their identity whenever they can. The only reason I do not have a pet is because I can't imagine myself in their paws, and I have concluded that a small apartment in New York City will not contribute to their flourishing. Despite these facts, I found myself thinking differently, even challenged after reading Entangled Empathy. It is hard to disagree with anything Gruen has written in the text. Therefore, my comments will be a combination of reflections, considerations, and questions about emotions, motivations, and applications of entangled empathy. I want to begin by focusing my comments on entangled empathy's relation to the moral emotions of sympathy, compassion, and other emotions, and I consider to what extent entangled empathy can stand on its own. I then go on to say something about what moves us to attend to others. Finally, and without intending to place humans at the center of the conversation, I think about entangled empathy in practice by reflecting on the ways it can help us solve some human problems, particularly the racial divide in the United States. Okay. Comment on the writing here. This paragraph here, many essays I've been reading have some sort of a basically index paragraph at the end of the introduction. This is the right way to do it. You don't have to be so formal about it. This one is just giving general strategy, but the other ones are just sort of these little index paragraphs where it says, in section 1 I do this, in section 2 I do this. This is much more reasonable as far as when someone's reading your stuff. Granted, I'm starting to think that basically those index paragraphs are great for reviewers. Like if you have to like figure out what's going on in an essay, then they can refer back to the index paragraph. But still, it's just sort of, it makes me cringe now when I see those things. Okay. Anything else? Oh, I might comment also that I expect I'm a weird case, but I've lost all my intuitions about basically everything. So, like, whatever people have. Hey, what's up, Bewitched Frog? So I will. This is sort of like this person here, like preaching to the choir. I am like not the choir. I'm no one's choir at this point. I'm not in any choir. I'm not. You can't preach to my choir. There is no like church where I go. Like it's so. This is a very interesting thing. It's just like. I understand what the person's saying, but it's just like I'm not in that sort of. I don't have that thing. Okay, continuing. So, other emotions. Note that in the care tradition, empathy, sympathy, and compassion are moral emotions that focus on different forms of attention. She says all of these forms of moral attention recognize the reason that reason cannot be isolated from embodied emotional experiences and thus provides important tools for rethinking our relationship. Instead of showing how sympathy and compassion are connected to or have any role in her account of entangled empathy, Gruen makes a point to distinguish entangled empathy from these other moral emotions. She claims that both compassion and sympathy are elicited only in distress. Sympathy does not involve feeling with the other and has less of a motivating grip. Entangled empathy, however, involves relationships that are not only about suffering. Entangled empathy also has more of a motivational grip than the other two moral emotions, and it involves feeling what the other feels. These three emotions also share similarities according to Gruen. They are all directed at the well-being of others. Agents are able to maintain their own attitudes, although in empathy they can share the attitudes of others, and although sympathy can be condescending, entangled empathy can be inappropriate and epistemically inaccurate. Given these similarities and differences, I wonder if sympathy and compassion have a closer relationship to entangled empathy than Gruen describes. More specifically, I wonder, what is or what can be the role of or relationship of sympathy and compassion in entangled empathy? Does entangled empathy consist of other moral emotions or lead us to them? And is entangled empathy self-sufficient? It's just sort of interesting, just sort of this question itself. I mean, if you're a philosopher, you're going to make some sort of distinctions. It's just what philosophers do. And they're always, in some sense, I mean, unless you happen to hit some fundamental, like, distinction in reality, they're going to be fuzzy a little bit. So that's not really, I mean, there's no problem there. But it's just like, how do we do this stuff? And in some sense, it's the danger of being a philosopher. All these people, like these writers are excellent philosophers, probably. I don't actually know them, but I suspect they are. That you're gonna make, whenever you make these distinctions, it's just sort of like a job hazard that you're gonna get a little too close to other ideas at times. So it's like, how does that play out? So it's an interesting question. How does like sort of the philosophizing about this stuff play out? Gruen notes that entangled empathy consists of emotion and cognition, but I am not exactly sure what Gruen means by emotion here. Emotion could mean the fellow feeling we share with others when we empathize with them. I can feel sadness at an animal's misfortune. I can also feel happy about an animal's joy. If entangled empathy is not only about perception but also about relationships, then emotion is not limited to the emotions we share with other animals, but it also includes the emotions we have in response to the situations of animals. In Adam Smith's account of empathy, it is not merely feeling what others feel, but feeling what others ought to feel or feeling on behalf of others. Smith's account of empathy is able to capture what David Hume's account does not. For Hume, a person's behavior is the effect that causes us to have an idea of that person's feelings. This idea of his or her feelings is directly transmitted to the very passion itself. Stephen Darwall thinks this is the most rudimentary and primitive form of empathy. Even if babies are able to have empathy because this kind of empathy, emotional contagion, works through mimicry. A baby can cry at the sound of other babies crying. In doing so, the baby's fear or sadness is transmitted in the very passion itself in the empathetic baby. However, on Smith's view, I can feel anger at an animal's suffering and not share the sadness of the suffering animal. In in Smithian empathy, rather than in respond to others' emotion, we respond to their situation from their standpoint. By the imagination, we place ourselves in the other situation and imagine what we ourselves should feel in the like situation. We do not copy their feelings as we imagine them. Instead, we place ourselves in their situation and imagine how we would feel if we were there, if we were they. This feeling does not have to be a mirrored emotion. It can be a distinct feeling in response to the other situation. In this case, then, entangled empathy can consist of, but is not limited to, emotions like sympathy and compassion, as well as other emotions like resentment. If entangled empathy can consist of a range of emotions, this does not settle the question of what the relationship is between entangled empathy and other emotions. I want to consider this relationship in more detail by considering several possibilities. Alright, so this is sort of laying out some of the issues. Like this theory right over here that I just read, if it, what's it called? It's like you feel how you would feel if we were they. This feeling does not have to be a mirrored emotion. It can be a distinct feeling in response to the other situation. See, that's the question like above when I raised like what it's like to be a bat. I don't know what it's like to be a bat, but I can imagine what it would be like to be a bat and be hungry. So I can imagine what it is to be hungry, and as basically another mammal, I might expect that like the feeling of hunger might actually be somewhat similar. Because they're not that different. I mean, I don't know what it is to exactly be a bat, but I do kind of know what it is to be a hungry mammal. So, yeah. One possibility is that entangled empathy is a site of development for other emotions. If entangled empathy helps us to provide context and understanding about what the right and just response would be, entangled empathy can also be a process in which these other emotions are nurtured and developed. For example, if a concern about emotions is their fittingness and size, then the recognition of our relationship with animals and the call to their needs and vulnerabilities will help determine what kinds of emotions will aid in these relationships. Entangled empathy also can help guide us to what is a fitting and appropriate effective response to these relationships. On this view, I imagined entangled empathy as a moral process that helps us frame what is morally salient. Within this process, perception does not do all the work by itself. Rather, emotions can help signal to us when our relationship has increased or decreased in quality. These can also help us to transform our relationships. In the case of good relationships, these moral emotions can help us maintain the quality of our relationships. This point is related to another possibility. So, this is saying moral processes frame what is morally salient. What's moral then? Signal to us when our relationships have, changed, basically. So, I don't know exactly how the emotions are signals of such things, or are they, fittingness and size. So this is kind of a development for other emotions. Context. Yeah, I'm with the author here and being a little confused about understanding emotion, and so this is one possibility how it frames our emotions. Alright, so let's continue. So empathy helps us frame our emotions. And then by giving them a structure that lets us interpret how our relationships change. Okay. Perhaps moral emotions arise from entangled empathy. Bruins claim that sympathy and compassion respond to distress, but entangled empathy is not limited to that domain. It does not exclude the possibility that sympathy and compassion can still arise from entangled empathy. If entangled empathy calls us to be responsive and responsible in our relationships by attending to others, then entangled empathy could activate compassion or sympathy in moments of distress and activate other emotions in moments where there is no suffering. If this activation language is too strong, we can say that entangled empathy can lead to these other emotions. Alright, so entangled empathy does not only frame our emotions, but can also sort of spur them on in certain cases. Perhaps. Smith thinks this is possible with empathy when he says the compassion of the spectator must arise altogether from the consideration of what he himself would feel if he was reduced to the same unhappy situation. For Smith, compassion arises from empathy. In other words, empathy can lead us to compassion. Likewise, entangled empathy can lead us to other moral emotions. For example, I can recognize that I am in relationship with animals and should be concerned about what kind of relationship I have with them. I have a caring perception of them and recognize that I am called to tend to their needs and interests. As a result, I am more prone to be motivated to help to end animal suffering. For example, show sympathy because entangled empathy has made me more sensitive to their well-being. I do not think that only empathy can give rise to sympathy, but this does not change the fact that empathy is an emotion that can give rise to sympathy. Darwell turns to experimental work by C.D. Batson and his colleagues to support the claim that sympathy can arise from empathy. In one study, participants were divided into two groups, high empathy and low empathy subjects. High empathy subjects were those who were told to imagine how the person they are observing feels. They were told to empathize. Low empathy subjects were those who were told to pay attention to information they learned from observing the person. So it's like the metadata. Batson and his colleagues found that the high empathy subjects show a remarkable disposition to help even when they can easily escape doing so without vicarious personal distress. Darwell calls the motivational state to help sympathy. To help sympathy. Darwell takes this as evidence that there is a psychological connection between empathy and sympathy. For Darwell, empathy brings the other's relation to his situation into a view in a way that can engage sympathy on his behalf. Similarly, entangled empathy can give rise to sympathy in ways that can lead to helping behavior. Alright. Darwell's account also differs from Gruen's account of entangled empathy in two ways. First, for Darwell, empathy can lead to sympathy, but he does not claim that empathy can lead to other moral emotions. Second, by arguing that empathy focuses on the situation, the sympathy focuses on the person in the situation. Darwell favors sympathy over empathy. Darwell claims that when we are empathetic, we act out of distress that we feel. However, when we are sympathetic, we act out of response to the distress of others. Those who are highly empathetic can suffer depression and anxiety. Influenced by Darwell, Bloom concludes that a high level of empathy does not make one a good person, and that a low level does not make one a bad person. Being a good person is likely more related to distance, to feelings of compassion and kindness, along with intelligence, self-control, and a sense of justice. Unlike in Darwell's account of empathy, it is possible that if animals are not suffering, entangled empathy can still lead to a moral agent to other moral emotions. With entangled empathy, a concern for the quality of the relationship can lead me to love in order to maintain the relationship. Lead me to love. Okay. Entangled empathy can even lead me to feel shame or guilt when the quality of the relationship declines or is in need of improvement. An adequate response to Darwell's distress concern is what I call the moderation claim. Too much of an emotion or attitude is bound to cause problems. At least Aristotle thought so, hence his doctrine of the mean. Too much anger is bound to cause distress. Too much sympathy can also cause distress. However, entangled empathy lacks the distressful fate that Darwell and Bloom are concerned about. Rather than merely feeling what others feel or only imagining ourselves in their suffering shoes, entangled empathy does not, by definition, constitute distress. Entangled empathy goes beyond only feeling what others feel to have a caring perception, a recognition that we are in a relationship with others and responsible in these relationships. It is an experiential process that is a blend of emotion and cognition. Entangled empathy does not require that distress be a necessary or sufficient part of the process. I'm getting a Kantian feel here. Maybe this was just I was looking at a Kantian flavored paper before, for some other reasons. I'm getting a Kantian feel that the entangled empathy is a structure on how we understand our emotions. So the entangled empathy sort of pre-structures our emotional responses to other agents. In this case, like our relationships with animals and other people. And so we've got some sort of pre-structured way, the categories of how we are deal with others. So I'm just sort of getting this Kantian understanding of what's going on in our moral life via this sort of entangled empathy categorical structure, where the emotions that are related within that structure. So we'll see. It could be possible that entangled empathy has no need for these moral emotions and I'm only making a futile fuss. In Upheavals of Thought, Martha Nussbaum argues that empathy does not contribute anything of ethical importance entirely on its own. To support this, she notes that a sadistic torturer can feel empathy to achieve his sadistic ends. The Nazis were able to persuade Germans of their dehumanization position of Jews. They accomplished this not only by blocking empathy, but also by blocking But also, by blocking empathy, they obstructed compassion. On her view, empathy by itself is not enough. How different is entangled empathy? Does entangled empathy require collaboration with other moral emotions to achieve its ends, or is it self-sufficient? Is recognition of our relationship, fellow feeling, and caring perception doing all the work? I am worried that they are not. Yeah, see, this is what I mean when I was saying does not contribute anything of ethical importance entirely on its own. Like if it's only the structure of where the emotions are, then it may not contribute anything. It may just be some sort of background theory of metaphysics, and not in the good sense of metaphysics, in the sort of extraneous metaphysics. Okay. It seems impossible that one who has entangled empathy could use entangled empathy for sadistic ends. Well, sure, you can always use things for bad. But the reasons that this would not work are not just the recognition of the relationship and its aims, but also the moral emotions that are either embedded in entangled empathy or follow from it. For this reason, I am sympathetic to the need to justify why the account is called entangled empathy and not entangled sympathy or compassion. However, I worry about the implications of making a strong contrast between entangled empathy and other emotions and excluding these specific emotions from an account of entangled empathy. After discussion of emotion, it makes sense now to turn to the concept of being moved that Gruen presents in the book. Alright, so this is a little bit of a worry about exactly what, if it's a little too, perhaps, abstract. And so, but, again, going back to the original sort of thing, how are we to exactly individuate all these different concepts? And so, a little bit of a difficulty there. Okay. But we make sense now to turn the concept of Gruen present in the book. Being moved. Gruen argues that we are in all kinds of relationships that constitute who we are. Recognition of this, Gruen believes, will motivate reflection on the type and quality of our relationships. This reflection will move us to attend to our particular relationships in the hopes of making them better. There are two ways that we can view being moved. One, in an affective sense. For example, I was moved by the dog's face. Maybe because it was a sad face? I don't know. Two, in a motivational sense. For example, I was moved to attend to the dog. In the affective sense, an object or event leads one to feel something. In the motivational sense, an object or event leads one to do something, although one can also feel something as a result. I take it that Gruen is using the moved in the motivational sense, so I read her relationality argument as, in addition to other things, providing a motivational account of what entangled empathy can do. Although I believe that the recognition of the relationship will at least move us to reflect on the quality of the relationship, I am not sure that this reflection alone will move us to attend to these particular relationships. I do not take Gruen's use of reflection to be about theoretical reasoning. I am clear that the reflection she refers to is reflection on the quality of our relationships and not reason in the abstract sense. Nevertheless, I reject the role of this kind of reflection, just as I reject Kantian motivation. Kant thinks that reflection on the moral law, through the categorical imperative, will move us to obey it. I have enough experience with humans to know that if we were actually moved morally by reflection alone, we would be better and the world would be a better place. I do not doubt that reflection will play a part in being moved, but I think that being moved also comes about by other features within entangled empathy. I claim that to be moved to attend to the relationships will depend on A, how much we care about the object of the relationship, B, whether we favor immediate over distant relationships or give value to those distinctions, and C, whether agents actually value the quality of the relationship. Alright, side note, as I've said before in this series, if you're thinking something when reading a philosophy paper, it's usually because the author wants you to be thinking it. These people are very smart and they know what they're doing with their writing. So, I bring up Kant a few minutes ago, and now we're getting the rejection of Kantian motivation here. So, yeah. Consider the following example, and feel free to ask questions about this chat if you wish. I'll try to answer. Consider the following example while also forgiving me for using an example of distress. Michelle and her friends are animal lovers who decide to take a trip to Central Park. While walking in the park, they notice that as in other urban cities, the horses were not getting enough water. They noticed that the horse's job requires them to walk and carry many people with little time for rest. This did not sit well with Michelle and her friends. A few people in the park took notice of this mistreatment. After a couple hours, Michelle and her friends soon became tired from walking in the park. A horse and carriage rolled by and the driver asked them if they wanted a ride. Although they were very tired, Michelle and her friends rejected the driver's invitation. Recognizing their relationship with the horse and their interest in their well-being, Michelle and her friends responded that with indignation refused to patronize the horse and carriage service. They then proceeded to give the horse water, rubbing it gently while trying to get the driver to empathize with the horses. Michelle and her friends did not want to be complicit in the mistreatment of horses. This is going to get into the de Blasio argument now, being a New York person, like de Blasio. Okay. What moved the agents to attend to the vulnerabilities and needs of the horses? It appears that it was more than just reflection on the type and quality of their relationship with animals. They were moved because they genuinely care for horses' well-being. They value horses for their own sake. They do not see the relationship with horses as a distant impersonal relationship or as conducted through a mediator. They see themselves as being in a relationship with animals, and this closeness moves them to do something instead of leaving it up to others. They do not only reflect on the quality of the relationship they have with animals, but they are concerned about the type of relationship they have with animals. This matters to them. Not only do these agents have entangled empathy, but this empathy is not limited to that particular horse. They have entangled empathy for other horses and animals. As a result, these features will move them to respond to other animals in other contexts. In summary, what moves agents to attend to animals is not only reflection on the quality of the relationship. They have to at least care about the animals and care about the quality of the relationship with animals in order to be motivated to attend to them. Moreover, being moved requires that there be no favoritism for a particular kind of relationship, for example, pet relations over wild animal relationships. This allows for an agent to be moved no matter how close or distant the animal may be from them. Okay, I actually have a little bit of a beef with this argument here, because how this goes to what do you count as which animal, what counts as an animal? Like, do you count insects as animals in this case? What's the ontology of animals? So it's like, if you're gonna talk the quality of the relationship with animals, the issue is who decides what counts as being with it, what counts as an animal there. So there's maybe even a phenomenological question. What do you recognize as something worthy of being falling under that category? So I have a little I don't have a problem with like the overall argument, but like I think there's a question here of what where are the boundaries of the classes of things, and how does that get understood? So you're still gonna have. I don't think this solves the problem. There is the overall point stands, but there's still going to be a question exactly where the cutoff is. Like, I mean, do you care about cockroaches if you live in New York? Like, really? I mean, I understand the horse one, but like the cockroaches, they're not your pets, but with the quality of the relationship with your cockroach, maybe you like spiders because they kill the cockroaches. I don't know. But like, this is like, you see, it's like, it's, just saying that there's no favoritism seems a little bit strong here. That's all. That is my great the entire conclusion, that there's no favoritism. We're people. We're going to show some favoritism. Other applications. I want to conclude my remarks by looking at the human-animal application of entangled empathy. I think Grun's account of entangled empathy achieves what she aims for, and it has tremendously changed the way I view my relationship with animals. Although Grun's focus in the book is to provide an alternative ethic for our relationship with animals, I cannot help but think about our relationship with human animals. I gotta go back on the side. What was her name? Inside Ethics. She's an excellent person and philosopher. Blanking on her name though. She was at the New School. I think she's out in Oxford now. Alice Crary. You might go back and read that book. I read some of it. I didn't read all of it. But yeah, there's a different book on animals and human relationships. Although there has been moral progress in the United States. Excuse me for laughing at that statement. There are still cities that are segregated. The wealth gap between blacks and whites is very wide. Xenophobic speech has been acceptable political rhetoric. Prisons are disproportionately filled with black and brown people, and biased practices, policies, and policing have tremendously policing have tremendous impact on prisoners. One of the solutions to these problems is the empathy cure. That is, if only whites could have empathy for blacks, things would change. Or if only these groups could understand each other, things would be different. The empathy cure is not just some hope for the future that is unsupported by empirical evidence. The idea has been tested in psychological laboratories. Andrew Todd and his colleagues performed 5 experiments that tested the impact of perspective taking on racial bias. In one experiment, subjects were shown a video of a white man and black man, respectively, shopping in a department store and being stopped by the police. The black man clearly suffered discrimination. The subjects were divided into groups in which they were asked to imagine what the black man was feeling, to imagine themselves in the black man's situation, or to remain objective. They were then given a test to measure unconscious bias. The groups who were asked to engage in perspective taking were less biased than the objective group. In another experiment, subjects were shown a photo of an African American male. They were instructed to take his perspective or be objective. Afterwards, they wrote an essay about a day in his life. The experiment did not stop there. Subjects were also asked to meet individually with an African American woman who, unbeknownst to them, was part of the research team but blind to the experimental hypothesis and condition. They simply talked with her in front of a hidden camera about their psychology course. The African American woman reported that she had more positive interactions with subjects who were part of the perspective-taking group. The researchers concluded, although it certainly cannot promise a full understanding of the harsh realities of discrimination, perspective-taking may help to decrease the psychological alienation and mistrust that characterizes contemporary intergroup relations and thereby encourage more and more positive intergroup contact. The researchers admit that perspective-taking or empathy is just one strategy among many that has the potential to increase positive racial interactions. Likewise, seeing empathy as a panacea is mistaken, but I do think empathy can help. However, no matter the hope we may have for empathy, there is also social psychology research that may give us reason to doubt that empathy can help. You know, I was just thinking, like, the fact that, like, this stuff does work, it also works in the opposite direction. Currently, we have tons of online just sort of propaganda showing horrible things online. I mean, some of it's true, a lot of it's propaganda, and, like, meant to basically destroy empathy, I think, for other groups. And so it's like, oh, these people are terrible. It's demonization. And so it's like the flip side of this empathy is the demonization. And I think we're getting more and more of that also because it does work. So this point is well taken. So the problem is it turns into a escalation war at this point is kind of what our contemporary society looks at. Political demonization and sort of maybe social demonization. And it's working on this empathy sort of structure here maybe. So it's an interesting sort of thing to look at. Alright. Researchers claim that there exists a racial empathy gap. The first study to explore the racial empathy gap was conducted by X. Zhu Xu and S. Han X. Xu and Wang. The researchers showed that white and Asian participants photographs of white and Asian individuals in painful and painless situations. By analyzing the region of the brain typically involved in empathy, the researchers concluded that participants empathize more with members of their in-group than with out-group members. This doubt about empathy's ability to extend to those outside of our in-group seems to support criticisms of Bloom and Prince, who argue that empathy is biased and localized. Prince notes that we have more empathy for those close to us and less empathy for those farther away, thus empathy is distributed inequitably. How can an account of entangled empathy help us out of this dilemma? Yeah, this is similarly related to the above criticism I was saying about how it doesn't matter you show no favorites. I mean, that doesn't seem to be right. Of course, people show favorites. Like, don't insult my mom. You can go insult your mom, but don't insult my mom. Or, as the old joke goes, I can pick my nose, you can pick your nose, but I can't pick your nose. So, in previous work, I have considered how Adam Smith's notion of habitual sympathy can help us extend empathy to distant others. By habitual sympathy, I mean affection built up over time that creates empathy. This, for Smith, is a way out of our localized empathy, and he suggests we can get there through face-to-face contact. After reading Entangled Empathy, I think we have the tools to take Smith's idea even further. Perhaps one solution to our racial problem is not that we need only to try to befriend members of every group and establish face-to-face contact in order to create affection and empathy. This may be impossible for some, depending on their geographical location. Gruen helps us to see that we are already entangled. No matter how distant or different, we are already in relationships with one another. How is this so? For Gruen, granting moral considerability to animals does not depend on their similarity to humans. Although some animals are similar to humans socially and rationally, these same animals are also different from humans in many ways. Gruen thinks that by overlooking differences solely focusing on similarities, we can overlook distinctively valuable aspects of the lives of others. Overlooking these differences can also be dangerous because by doing so we may fail to attend to animals' different needs. What qualifies non-human animals for moral consideration are not their similarities to humans. What gives them moral consideration is the fact that they are sentient beings with experiences and whose lives can be better or worse. Similarly, what makes humans worthy of moral consideration and thus targets of entangled empathy is not their biological or social similarities to one another. It is not because some humans are part of our family tree, have the same skin color that we do, or live in the same neighborhood that we do that qualifies them for moral consideration. Human animals are targets of our entangled empathy because they are also sentient beings whose lives can be better or worse. Entangled empathy keeps us mindful of the differences in context and experiences so that we do not see difference as a barrier to empathy. The moral considerability also puts us in an ethical relation. I want to stop here for a second. I'm just wondering, against the people who think that you need similarity to have empathy, like you have empathy or sympathy with somebody that is similar to you. Exactly how similar do they need to be to you? Like if I hurt my hand or if like I hurt my knee hurts. I mean, actually, my knee doesn't actually hurt right now. My ankle hurts though. Like your ankle doesn't hurt now. Maybe it does, but like my ankle hurts. And even if your ankle did hurt, it's like okay, that's your hurt, that's my hurt, and it hurts basically the same. We understand what pain is. But you're still a different person, so it's like, why are you empathizing with me? And so you see something and you understand the pain, but exactly how close do you have to understand that specific pain? So there's a question of, I mean, again, it goes back to some of the Wittgenstein's, like, oh, it's my pain and your pain, but still, exactly how close does it have to be? As opposed to how, this is saying it doesn't matter how far away it is, but on the other side, how exactly close to the relationship, how similar does the relationship have to be? I mean, I was talking earlier about I'm a mammal, that's a mammal, maybe our hunger is similar, but there's a question of exactly, well, I'm me and you're you, and my pain and your pain are different, but exactly how different? And so even this question of empathy even at a very, very in-group, very closeness is very different. I'm not sure we have a good answer to that either. Okay, continuing. Gruen notes that being in an ethical relation involves, in part, being able to understand and respond to others' needs, interests, desires, vulnerabilities, hopes, perspectives, etc., not simply by positing from one's own point of view what they might or should be, but by working to try to grasp them from the perspective of the other. Now, how do you take the perspective of the other? Good question. Note that Gruen does not claim that we are in personal relationships, for example, family and friends, with other human animals. Families are a group of people who love and care for each other and are often bonded by respect and common interests. Friendship requires some degree of intimacy, mutuality, and shared activity. Relationships of inequality, such as relationships with animals and the disabled, may fail to reach this friendship requirement. However, an ethical relation requires only a relationship between sentient beings. On the empathy simpliciter view, we can empathize only with a restricted few. In Smith's view, we can put ourselves in the shoes of others within our immediate intimate circles. Yeah, see, I'm even questioning how big that circle is just above. That was my question. Like, how intimate is the intimate circle? So, it's like, what does intimate actually count as in this context? The problem for Gruen is that when it comes to animals, this can lead to an anthropomorphizing that is problematic. Smith's account also limits empathy to humans who are close to us. According to Hume, we can catch the emotions of others who are having an emotional experience that is visible to others. However, this limits empathy to those who are visible to us. We are not able to catch the emotions of those we cannot see and who are not able to make themselves visible to us. According to the racial empathy literature, we are more prone to empathize with those who are of our own race. This limits empathy to those who look like us. Laurie Paul recently argued in Transformative Experience that humans vary so much and so deeply that even small differences contextually in experiences between people can prevent us from knowing what it's like to be a different type of person. Yeah, so Paul notes that unless you have had the relevant experiences, what it is like to be a person or an animal, very different from yourself, is, in a certain fundamental way, inaccessible to you. We can imagine experiences we have not had, but Paul thinks we cannot imagine them enough to let us know what it is really like to be a bat, dog, or human with an implanted chip. We need to have the experience itself to know. Imagining would not be enough. The empathy accounts of Smith, Hume, and Paul place restrictions on for whom we can and cannot have sympathy. However, Gruen's account of Entangled Empathy expands our empathy targets. It makes it possible to have empathy for animals and also for humans who are not in our intimate circles, are not visible to us, are of a different race and ethnicity, and who have had transformative experiences. The objects of our Entangled Empathy are not as limited as the objects of empathy simpliciter. This is because of Gruen's account of moral considerability and ethical relationships. Gruen's account is influenced by the care tradition, according to which we are interdependent, but we also have agency and are participants in the world. We are dependent on one another to survive, and this level of dependence varies. Our lives being better or worse depends on us all responding to one another's needs and vulnerabilities. These relationships shape who we are and have life-altering effects. We may need to create platonic relationships. We may need to seek out romantic relationships. However, given that we are already interdependent, sentient beings with experiences, this puts us in an ethical relationship with others, a relationship that we do not need to create or seek out in order to have. The challenge is to reflect on and care enough to want these relationships to be of good quality. Entangled empathy is not just about imagining another's perspective. Indeed, it goes beyond mere perception to a caring perception. Different from just having empathy, this perception will change how we see the world, one another, and ourselves. Perhaps what the racial empathy gap research really shows is not that we empathize with those who are, by definition, part of our in-group. Perhaps what it reveals is that we extend empathy to those who we only think are part of our in-group. Entangled empathy is a call for us to radically change whom we cognitively and effectively think we are in relationship with, whom we share familiarity with, and whom we have responsibilities to. Entangled empathy reminds us that in-group is a wider concept than we thought. Although empathy could be biased, at least prior to habitual sympathy, it is impossible for entangled empathy to be. It is because the problem of bias in empathy is due to our limited conception of in-group. However, if entangled empathy enables us to see that we are already in relationships with others and that there are more people in our in-group than we thought, we need not encounter the problem of bias that we find with empathy simpliciter. It is difficult to, this is sort of the show no favoritism issue again. This is very hard. Like, perhaps they're right, but this seems more aspirational. I mean, as this person says, you're in New York. It's like, yes, you are already in relationships with everyone else because you're a New Yorker. It's very easy to be on the subway platform and just like be annoyed when like the train finally comes and then just blows by your station. You just want to kill somebody, and not like, but it's not anyone on the platform. Everyone on the platform wants to kill somebody at that point. So you're with all of them and you're in a relationship, and they can be all the way at the other side of the platform. You may never ever be that close to that person ever again, but everyone has the same thought. So it's like, yes, there are more people in the in-group, but it's I'm still not sure that this isn't like a relative thing. It's still might be relational, and in some sense, if you have to keep shifting your relational understanding of this stuff, then why, like, what's the content there? I'm a little worried about that part of the account. Okay. It is difficult to test the effectiveness of ethical theories. Even if we were able to, as Gruen has noted, the lab world is very different from the real world. Nevertheless, I think that engaging in the exercise of changing the way we see one another and ourselves is a radical idea that has the potential to transform our world of relations. I do not think, however, that the only uptake of entangled empathy is that it changes how we see one another. This is why Gruen refers to entangled empathy as a caring perception instead of merely as a perception. Entangled empathy gives us a more accurate picture of what our responsibility to others might be. It is much about action as about effect and perception. As Gruen notes, it directs our attention to things that need a moral response. As a result, there is a difference between empathetic responses and entangled empathetic responses. Empathetic responses are responses that come about because of empathy simpliciter. Entangled empathetic responses are responses that come about because of entangled empathy. Now, let us return to the example of Michelle and her friends. They see themselves as being in a relationship with the horse. You see, this is my problem, exactly. This is like the train example I just gave. Call it the trolley example. The trolley example I just gave, the train example above, they had to see the horse to get into this relationship with that particular horse. Okay. They have an entangled empathy. When they see the horse being mistreated in the park, they are moved to respond because of this entangled empathy. They respond with indignation and refuse to be complicit in the horse's mistreatment. They also rebuke and encourage the driver to treat the horse with dignity. Yeah, the drivers people in New York are very angry. They're like, we treat our horses great. So they do get indignant about that. In Bruin's account, the entangled empathy is, but to be fair, I have no idea if they actually do. They just say they do. That's all I know. So I don't know who's right, if the horses are getting mistreated. I do not know. This means that trying to attend to their vulnerabilities and promote their well-being. As a result, Michelle and her friends' entangled empathetic response is both a moral and political response. Their entangled empathy not only leads to or informs their political response, but it is entangled with those responses. This is different from the relationship between empathy, simplicator, and moral and political responses. For example, I can imagine myself in your shoes and still not do anything to place you into new shoes. This empathy need not lead to political action. I can have an empathetic response by using my imagination without engaging in any action. In addition, not all political responses are entangled empathetic responses. I can give you new shoes without seeing myself in relationship with you. This can lead to ineffective political action. We were talking about this the other day, where basically governments give what they think is needed, but then they just be like, well, it didn't work, but we gave them all this money and all of this stuff, but it wasn't actually what they, it was just sort of patronizing the group, saying, well, this is what you need, even though that actually had nothing to do with what they really needed. So it's a political issue. Nevertheless, if they do not view themselves as being in an ethical relationship with the group, they could respond to the group in ways that are paternalistic and harmful. Well, yes, exactly. In order to decrease crime, for example, a police commissioner may decide to put more police officers in urban communities. This is a political response to rising crime. However, if the police force does not see itself as being in an ethical relationship with the members of those communities, it may treat those members as criminals instead of citizens. Yeah. So, welcome to 2020. The police may treat them like a community that needs to be policed instead of a community that needs to be served. Without entangled empathy, they may not have an accurate picture of who they are and what their responsibilities to others might be. Political responses lack an important ethical and epistemic dimension when they are not also entangled empathetic responses. Yeah, we were reading a paper the other day about saying, look, if you've got like very different groups of people in power versus who is the community on the ground, then this is like just gonna happen a lot, and a lot of work has to be done to overcome this sort of paternalistic response to problems. So the question is, can the entangled empathy work there? Yes, I think I agree with this author. I mean, it's just it's difficult. This is a hard thing because it's just like, well, and also because they say, look, this has worked in other communities, it should work over here. Of course that doesn't work because exactly that people are different from the other communities are different, and it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So, question of the entangled empathy, if you see yourself already in a group, but then you have to understand the unique problems. Okay, but getting beyond a cold-blooded ethic. Was this last page? Yeah. Empathy skeptics may be successful at leading some to have second thoughts about choosing empathy over a more cold-blooded ethic. I want to end by considering whether Gruen can rescue us from this cold-blooded route. Bloom argues that, cold-blooded, you're not with our lizard friends. Sorry, that's just silly. Bloom argues that putting yourself into someone else's shoes and feeling others' pain is a bad thing, and it makes the world worse. Physical shoes and feeling others' pain is a bad thing. Yeah, I guess it increases, was that a consequentialist thing where you're increasing the world pain? Our failures to make the world better are motivated by an effective rush and an empathetic engagement. Governments use empathy to persuade their citizens to go to war, and then we are surprised about the awful consequences of that decision. Bloom does not think that it is a coincidence. He claims that empathy ignores the long-term consequences of our actions because when we empathize, we are focused on feelings and not on their consequences. Bloom claims that there are some people who give because they get a buzz out of it. Others give first by asking, what does the world need and how can I make things better? Bloom thinks that the latter makes a bigger change in the world. He suggests that we act in a more cold-blooded way by asking, how can I help other people, instead of self-moralizing through empathy. He thinks we should respond with non-emphatic compassion, which he describes as a more distanced love and kindness and concern for others. I think Bloom and those convinced by his argument will benefit from Gruen's account of entangled empathy. Bloom and Gruen have two different accounts of empathy, but they are both focused on actions and consequences. Instead of taking the cold-blooded route, Gruen recognizes that asking, how can I help, requires a caring perception, not cold-bloodedness. Yeah, so we've got a difference here in just sort of like sort of the analysis version and the cold-bloodedness versus the phenomenal version and the phenomenological version in the perception. What like how you look is important versus the calculation is important. So how you care versus how you calculate. If we do not recognize how entangled we are, we will never understand the moral force of the help question and our relationship to the object that we want to help. We are not cold, isolated individuals who are distant and disconnected from the world and yet can still make moral decisions on behalf of others without any problems. Cold-blooded help is what the police commissioner provided in the example above. I have argued that this creates more problems than it solves. Not always. Sometimes it does. I mean, you can... Well, I guess it's more like that basically saying it's the broken clock theory. Like, yeah, it's right sometimes, but you should try to empathize, but sometimes you happen to get it right. There is nothing wrong with being and feeling connected. This connection can help us pay more attention to the consequences of our actions and to those who may be affected by them. There is nothing unhelpful about seeing that our webs are not meant to destroy or ignore the other, but rather are meant to show how connected we really are and what we are called to do as a result. This is the start of something special, not something to be wary of. Okay, I just want to correct what I said earlier, or just a half second, I'll make it better. Look, just because you're calculating, it depends on what you actually are calculating on. Again, there's still a phenomenology. What is the goal of your calculation? If you are a brilliant calculator, you might be able to solve a lot of the problems and not cause a million problems also because you are doing something. Yes, it's cold-blooded, but it happens to be the right thing to do either way. Now, the question is, can a cold-blooded calculation work where caring perception, without a caring perception to know what the right thing is? That's a different problem. Maybe, maybe not. But just because you're being cold-blooded and calculating doesn't mean you have chosen the wrong target of your method of helping. Sorry, a bit of a pragmatist criticism, I guess you could say. Because like, what do you care how the person is thinking about it if they get it right every time? So it'd just be a little weird, but you take what you can get in some sense. If someone just happens to do it this way, don't be so that's how they think, and that's fine. Okay, so any other questions? If anyone has any questions out in the audience, please let me know. I will try to figure it out. So this presented sort of like the structure of how we have emotional relationships as the entangled empathy. And so that gives a sort of a Kantian spin on things, and there was actually a Kantian counter-argument a little bit, but the author still thinks that there is a valuable way to restructure how we have relationships with the world because we are already in relationships in this sort of in that we have a lot more in common with different parts of different people and animals than we normally would be saying. Normally just sort of assume. It's not just that the in-group is the in-group, but there's a lot more that, of course, we could have in common. And if we understand that structure, then we can start to expand that structure and therefore have a better control and understanding and care and empathy for everyone else in the world. I did argue that there was too much that this might get too wide. It might just get too metaphysical. That we don't know exactly how to zero in on any of the correct sort of like, no matter how distant something may be from, well, how do you zero in on what actually matters there? That if you get too general, then you might not actually be able to recognize what is important anymore. But I mean, you can try, but you might miss the mark more and more as you get wider and wider. Like I said, if you care for animals, well, do you care for cockroaches? Maybe. But and there's people who love insects. It's like, that's cool, but like, it's just in New York. It's just not usually what people are doing. So it's like, you do not like the cockroaches in your apartment. Sorry. It's most New Yorkers. So exactly what the limit of the in circle versus out circle, it's still going to be a problem. And how do you care for these things? Yeah, and there's a story that perhaps the thing to do with rats in New York City is actually not to kill them. You want to maintain the rat populations that we have, because rats are actually very territorial and they will keep out any new rats. And so basically, once you have the rats you have, you guys, they won't get any new, they'll prevent any new diseases from coming in because they will kill off any other rats. And so there won't be any new diseases due to rats. So once you get over whatever diseases your rats have, then maybe the right thing to do is just keep your rats the way they are, because they will prevent any new rats and new diseases from getting in, and that will actually be a public health good as opposed to any bad that you would have from the rats that are there. So it's like, do you care for the rats at that point? It's going to be a hard sell in New York. Okay, but that's about it for now. Please let me know if you send me anything if you want me to read it. And I'll be back, I think, tomorrow with another paper. Have a good day and stay safe out there, everybody, please. Bye-bye.